So in this video, we're going to be talking about some more things that Sony users will notice when using the Nikon ZR. So this is a part 3 of a so far 3-part series of things that I've noticed after coming from an fx3, A7S III kind of camera, going to the Nikon ZR. So if you're new here, I'm a DP based here in LA. I shoot a lot of commercial, fashion, and social media content. So if you're into that kind of stuff, definitely stick around for the upcoming content. So let's get straight into the video. So the first thing on this list that I definitely noticed is that the mic jack is actually in an awkward spot. Sony actually learned from their past mistakes and then put the mic jack in a place where the screen will not hit it. But on the Nikon ZR, it actually does interfere with the screen placement. So that is something to keep in mind. If you're used to having a wired mic on your camera, then you're gonna have to get used to having the mic jack in the way of turning the screen back and forth kind of thing. Not that big of a deal, but it is something to keep in mind, especially if you are not using a digital hot shoe mic. The huge screen, which I love, does get in the way when you're just trying to flip it back and forth. You can't really get an angled tilt on your screen, which is kind of an issue in some situations, so definitely keep that in mind. So the next thing you're for sure going to notice for a first-time user is going to be that it does record proxies off the rip when you shoot in R3D and E, and definitely keep that in mind because if you hand this footage off to an assistant editor without dumping the card and overchecking the card, you're going to see MP4 files and R3D files. Do not cut the MP4 files because those things look horrendous in comparison to the Nikon R3D. So definitely keep that in mind. If you're handing off the footage, don't hand off all the clips from the card. Either turn that off in the settings or make sure you notate that you want to use the R3D files because the H.265 is horrendous on this camera. If you're just dumping cards, handing it off to a DIT or whatever, they might dump the whole card into like a folder. Just make sure that you either tell your DIT or you sort those out prior to that happening, because I have had assistant editors where they've intercut MP4 files into an edit as opposed to the R3D files. So keep that in mind. The next thing that I for sure noticed is that there's actually no physical shutter. If you're like me, I also took a lot of stills with my A7S III, so there's no actual shutter actuation, which I definitely I'm on the fence on. I don't really like that. But then the thing that I actually really don't like in general from that is that it plays an audible sound and it doesn't sound good by default. But keep that in mind as well. There's no physical shutter, so there might be some issues with banding in some situations when you're using strobes if you use this as a stills camera. But there is a weird, kind of getting used to. There's no physical feel, tactile feel of a shutter actuation. So keep that in mind as well. And so the next thing comes from me shooting more stills with this camera, which I've actually been loving, is that when you touch the screen by default, it actually, in photo mode, it actually takes a still. I don't know who does that would want to just touch the screen instead of pushing a shutter button, but that by default is kind of weird to me because you would honestly think that it defaults to touch to focus or touch to track or something like that, but it does not. It's easily fixable. You can just change it in the settings, but I feel like navigating anything in the settings is always such a headache. So let's say if you're bringing this on a shoot for the first time, keep that in mind because any kind of touch tracking, you have to actually change it in the settings first before you can actually do it from the start. Okay, so the next thing that I noticed that I really did not expect is that there's actually a lot of first-party cheap and affordable lenses. So recently I bought the Nikon 40mm f2. That thing retailed for $200. I mean, I don't think there's any Sony lens that is that cheap, that is made by Sony, that has this good image quality and performance. That is honestly, I don't know. It's definitely mind-blowing in my opinion. And also you have the 35mm f1.4 from Nikon, also a first-party lens that has all the precise features that Nikon wants for their cameras, and that thing retails for $500 or $600. To have a 35mm f1.4 at that price is honestly insane, dude. Because the cheapest Sony lens that I can think of are those pancake 35mm f2.5 G lenses that go for $800 or $900. I mean, there obviously are expensive G Master equivalent lenses on the Nikon side, but there also are a lot of very affordable lenses that have insane quality for the price, and they're first party lenses. So keep that in mind as well. I mean, the 40mm f2, dude, that thing is a beast, man. And honestly, for the price of $200, That is a steal of a lens right there. It doesn't feel the best, but the image quality and performance are top tier in my opinion. So the next one is for all the cinematographers out there. These zebras on this camera are not the same as your traditional zebras like for a Sony camera. It doesn't go to 100 or 100 plus. It usually goes to like, I think it goes to like 250 or something like that, which is very different than what you're used to on your Sony cameras, because normally you would expose to a specific point, and generally speaking, you know, I would try to expose for middle grade, I think I like around 40% on the Sony cameras. But this camera in particular, it, like, you know, the clipping point is like 245 for zebras. Like that's like, it's just a different like numerical value you got to remember. So keep that in mind as well when you're configuring your zebras for the first time. There are a lot of videos out there that have broken down how to expose for this camera, but I feel like in this camera in particular, you really have to nail your exposure for you to not get like noisy shadows and banding and stuff like that. So keep that in mind as well. Okay, so the last thing on this list is when you put on a lens onto this camera, you actually have to turn it in the opposite way. But, or the issue that I do have from coming from Sony is that if you're using the Megadap adapter, you pretty much have to turn it the opposite way in the tension of which your mount is actually configured. So like for instance, you have to thread your camera, sorry, the Megadap adapter on this camera if you're using a Sony lens counterclockwise, but then when you put a Sony lens on it, it has to be clockwise. So that does put a little bit of stress onto your mount, and when you do put a Sony lens onto here for the first time with the Megadap adapter, you're gonna notice it's very stiff, and it almost feels like you're gonna be breaking something on the on the camera mount. But that's might be just from my experience, but definitely something to keep in mind, because in a fast environment, dude, I have had issues where I'm subconsciously turning it clockwise as opposed to counterclockwise. But again, this camera usually is a very tailored specific camera for me. I'm going to keep it on gimbal, same lens, so I'm not switching lenses on this thing too often, but that is something to keep in mind. Everything is opposite in terms of like twisting lenses onto this camera. Same thing with lens caps, stuff like that. The only thing I'm really upset about this camera so far, after the 3 months that I've had it, is that it does eat up so much storage. It is crazy. Please give us like a ELQ for the Nikon NE RAW, the R3D RAW. Some kind of compressed version of that raw codec would be insane, and definitely much appreciated, because I shot an interview recently for like a 30-minute take for an interview, 2-camera setup. I used the fx3 and then this camera as a B cam. The fx3 for 30 minutes was 50 gigs. This one was like 270 gigabytes for the 30 minutes. Not a big deal. I signed up for this kind of stuff, but I think that, you know, it'd just make this camera more versatile if it had more compression ratios for the RAW. But yeah, guys, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If I helped in any way, definitely let me know down below. If there's anything that I missed, let me know down below as well. But this is Giancarlo here, and I'll catch you guys later. Later.